Hey everybody, welcome in to another episode of Frogs Insider. Jamie Plunkett here. Just me tonight, just me on this episode. I say tonight because I'm recording this on Wednesday night, but you're probably going to be listening to this in the morning on your morning drive into work or sometime on Thursday. A little bit of a different show this evening. Like I said, it's just me, and we're going to be doing something a little bit different with the podcast this fall. If you remember, last year we went to a 2-show-a-week rhythm in football season. We would record our post game show, like our recap show, essentially on Sundays. That would come out on Monday mornings, and then we would do our midweek show that would typically come out on Thursday mornings, and that would include Melissa doing a preview of the upcoming game with someone from a publication that covered that team, that opponent, and then I would do like a Twitter Q&A, talk about some other stuff, make some picks, do that kind of stuff. Those episodes tended to be pretty long, hour and a half-ish long episodes, and so what we're going to do this year is split that content out, kind of repackage that content. So I'm still going to be talking about questions, doing kind of a larger, wider lens look at college football in the Big 12 in the middle of the week. And then Melissa's still going to continue doing her absolutely incredible preview series. Those are just going to show up separately in the podcast feed and separately on the YouTube channel this fall. We're going to test it out, see how it goes. This is the first week of that. I'm calling this the Indy Drill, right? Melissa's calling her previews from the other sideline. So a little bit of a branding change there for each of those kind of series within the larger podcast, I guess, if you will, kind of, TV shows on the main channel, I guess, if we're talking about YouTube, talking about old school traditional linear television, which is definitely still booming these days, right? But that's kind of what we're going to be doing. So this episode is an Indy Drill. It's the first one. We're going to be taking a look at some of the storylines from around college football, and then we're going to make some picks, get out of here. And then the next show in your feed after this one will be Melissa doing her preview. And then we'll be back again next week after that. So nothing's really changing. We're just shaking up how we do the content a little bit, and hope you guys like that. Hope it's more consumable that way, so you're not trying to power through an hour and a half long podcast every week. I know that we just did almost an hour and a half long podcast with the hot takes episode, but I feel like that should be an exception, not the rule, every year when we're reading all y'all's stuff and getting into it that way. So got a lot on the schedule for this show tonight. Excited that you guys are here. We've got Twitter questions. Got some questions on Twitter that we're going to talk about. The SEC changed its schedule. It's moving to a 9-game schedule. We're going to talk about what that looks like, the way that the SEC is doing it, and kind of think about whether the Big 12 should consider that version of the 9-game league schedule. We've also got Big 10 out here making insane playoff proposals. So we're going to talk about their 28-team playoff proposal, why that sounds insane, and who are some of the teams that would have gotten in last year if the 28-team playoff had been in place. We're also going to talk about an article that I really enjoyed reading recently. It was from Max Olson over at ESPN, and he did a lot of research into what teams are actually paying different position groups in college football. So we get a little bit of a better picture of what rev share actually looks like in college football this year, with some actual numbers, or ranges, I suppose, that players are making. We can kind of maybe guesstimate where TCU players fall in those budgets as well. And then we're going to make some picks. I've got 9 games coming up this week. It's week 1. We got the full slate of football starting on Thursday night. Very, very pumped. We're going to get into some of those picks as well at the end of the show. But let's jump in. So Twitter questions. We put out a call last week for hot takes, right? We wanted to hear the most crazy, insane things that you guys wanted to talk about or thought about for this TCU football season, and loved them. They were great. We had over 50 again. That episode is in the feed back on the YouTube channel if you want to go watch it if you missed it. But we also got some questions, people asking legitimate questions about the state of college football, about this year's TCU team, and we didn't address those on the show because it was a hot takes episode and the questions didn't really kind of fit, and like I said, it was almost an hour and a half long episode, but I didn't want to ignore them, didn't want you guys to ask a question and not hear back from anybody about it. So I'm going to start by talking about those questions tonight and taking a look at what you guys are thinking and what you guys are curious about when it comes to TCU football in 2025. So let's get into that a little bit. The first one comes from Throwback Frog, who had a lot of really great hot takes, is a very fun follow on Twitter as well, at Throwback Frog. They say, when I go back and watch games from 2014 and 15, they look so much more physical and fast compared to today. What's going on? Rose colored glasses, rule changes, watching a 2014 Ohio State team compared to a 2024 Ohio State team looks like night and day. And I think there's something to this. I think first, when you think about the rule changes that have happened in the last decade, specifically around helmet to helmet contact and the targeting rule, when you think about, uh, some of the other kind of tackling and hard hits that have gone out of style and get penalized now. Maybe they're not targeting fouls, but they are unnecessary roughness fouls or defenseless receiver fouls that would not have happened 10, 15 years ago. Those are um, being enforced more regularly now. And I think that's slowing down defenses a little bit. They're hesitating a step. They're not fully launching into a tackle like they would have 10 years ago. And so maybe that's why defenses look a little slower, is because in the back of these guys' minds, they're thinking, well, if I don't want to lower the crown accidentally, I don't want to get hit with a 15-yard penalty or, God forbid, an ejection, get suspended for half the next game. And so maybe they're moving maybe a step slower. I think that's another reason why we've seen offenses, scoring across leagues, not just in the Big 12 like it used to be, but in the SEC, sometimes in the Big 10. You look at like the Oregons and the Ohio States of the world, scoring is up. And I think that all has kind of a ripple effect from the rule changes that have tried to minimize the injury effect of what is ultimately a contact sport. And there's only so much you can do from a rules perspective. I think they've kind of hit the limit of what's reasonable, maybe even stepped past it slightly. And so I think that's why we maybe see a little bit of a difference in the physicality of the game today versus 10 years ago, or even further back. When it comes to the foot speed, though, I wonder if it's just that everybody's kind of caught up to that speed, especially on offense. At TCU, I think we've been really blessed to watch a lot of incredible talent and especially incredible speed over the last 2 decades of football. When you think about guys like Cavante Turpin and Darius Davis and Cam Eccles-Looper even was incredibly fast, but it's these guys that were kick returners and kind of gimmicky wide receivers who you could do a lot of creative stuff with. They would always hit these top end speeds of like 22, 23 miles an hour, just insane top end speeds. But there are tons of guys now that can touch those numbers. And so maybe it's not that things have slowed down. It's just maybe the average foot speed has gotten faster. And so everybody looks like they're more on the same kind of playing field there. Let's see here. Colin Post. Beans, our intern. Love Beans. Asks, CJ Caesar had a Big 12 Defensive Player of the Week award, but Josh Newton didn't. Can you guys explain that in under 200 words? We're not here to dog on former players. We're not going to do anything like that. CJ Caesar had great moments for TCU. Obviously, he did win a Big 12 Defensive Player of the Week award. Here's what I'll say, though, about Josh Newton. You go back to that season in 2022, and you think about who was in the secondary that year, and you've got Bud Clark, who's still around. You've got Trey Hodges-Tomlinson, who won the Thorpe Award that year. And you had Josh Newton, who I think got overlooked a lot of the time because of the guy that was playing corner on the other side, LT's nephew, obviously an incredibly good corner. But Josh Newton, I think, has proven in the last few years in the NFL as well that he is an incredibly talented cornerback. But it becomes challenging when you have other guys kind of taking away the oxygen on your own roster for everyone to get the full credit that they deserve. And so when it comes to Newton, I think he had an excellent year in 2022. I think he was a top 2 or top 3 cornerback in the Big 12, probably a top 10 corner in college football that year. But because of Trey Hodges-Tomlinson's weight and visibility and story, people didn't talk about Josh Newton maybe as much as they should have. And that falls on local media like me and everybody that's around TCU. And that also falls on national media to remember that there are great stories beyond just the ones and the big names in college football. But Josh Newton's doing just fine. He probably did earn or did deserve a couple Big 12 Defensive Player of the Week awards, but ultimately never got one. Robert Payne asks, do we have a kicking game? This is an interesting one. Melissa and I got on here a couple episodes ago and voiced some significant concerns about the kicking game this year. Curious to see, if there could be more consistency, especially in field goal kicks from Kyle Lemmerman. He struggled with that as a true freshman. There is no doubt that he has a tremendous leg, right? But there were some consistency issues with the accuracy. And we started to see that a little bit at the beginning of fall camp. He was missing some kicks in the mid 30s range, early, kind of low 40s range. But none of those kicks were short. Missed a couple 50-yarders that were not short. They were wide left or wide right. And the past couple of weeks, though, pretty much since Melissa and I brought it up on the podcast, he's looked much better. He's been much more consistent. He's mechanically much more sound. He's hitting field goals at a much more consistent rate. And you only hope that those couple weeks of really solid kicking give him some confidence. Maybe that was all he needed, right? Kicking is such a mental game. It's almost like putting in golf, where you're standing there, you're all alone, you're trying to make your mechanics and your motions as repeatable as possible. And you're also factoring in, kind of the elements, the wind. Is it blowing in? Is it blowing out? Is it blowing left, right? Which hash am I on? What's the turf like? Is it wet? Is it solid and hard? Am I going to slip? All of these factors that come into kicking, it can be a lot to either process really quickly, or B, shut out and just kind of go into reptilian brain mode and just make the kick, right? And so for a young kid, sometimes that can be the most overwhelming part of the game. And for Kyle Lemmerman, like, the talent is there very obviously. If he can solidify the mental aspect of things a little bit, I think he's going to go on to be a really good college kicker, a great college kicker even. He's entering his sophomore season. He had a great couple weeks of fall camp. Hopefully in Chapel Hill, he gets an opportunity to knock through a couple easy ones, and that can build some more momentum going into the rest of the season. Let's see. Ashley Stoll-Myers asks, can we smuggle the TCU field crew to Dublin next year? And how many different kinds of cleats is TCU equipment going to pack? So to the first one, I would love to see TCU field crew in Dublin this year. If you didn't watch Farmageddon in week 0, Iowa State and Kansas State in Aviva Stadium in Dublin, Ireland, exactly where TCU is going to be playing a year from now when they go over there and play North Carolina. The field was a disaster. It had rained all day. It was very muddy and slippery. Guys were sliding 10 to 12 yards after they hit the ground because of how wet and slippery it was. And that also washed away all of the yard markers. All of the yard lines were gone by the first half, to the point where they had to repaint the lines at halftime, and they still just got wiped away early in the third quarter. You could barely tell where teams were on the field, where the ball was supposed to be spotted. And I think it actually cost Kansas State early in the fourth quarter when Avery Johnson goes for it on 4th and 1. He runs it behind the left side of his offensive line. He gets hit right at what looked like to be a yard line. But they call it short on the field. They go back and they review it, and there's no visible line in the review that allows them to more accurately place the ball. It ends up being a turnover on downs. Iowa State scores quickly thereafter, gets a little bit of a lead, and they never end up relinquishing that. So I hope that the field is in better condition next year for TCU North Carolina. Maybe TCU grounds crew can go help with that. As far as cleats go, get long ones, right? Long cleats. Even if you lose a half step because you're sticking into the ground, at least you can stick a foot in the ground and make a cut or make a tackle, and you're not going to be slipping and sliding everywhere like those guys were last weekend. Come on, let's see. TCU Fiesta Bowl Champions 22 says Baylor versus TCU College will be a college game day. I think that was a hot take. Oh, here they go. Brick Balducci had a couple of questions as well. How are the O-line and the D-line looking was the first one. The offensive line, in my opinion, looks solid, looks consistent. much more consistent than it was this time last year. When you think about where TCU's offensive line was last year, they were still really, really working hard to find that right combination of guys in the interior offensive line. You had lost Cade Bennett already, so he was out with a back injury. He wasn't practicing. You had effectively two centers on the roster with James Brockermeyer and Colton Deary. But the reality is both of those guys were two of your five best offensive linemen. And so you had to play one of them out of position. It ended up being Deary playing left guard. And then you also had two transfers coming in Strickland and Carson Bruno, who were trying to figure out where they fit in as well. And they ended up splitting time at that right guard spot. Your tackles struggled, ended up moving a true freshman in Ryan Hughes into that tackle spot later in the year. Ben Taylor Whitfield was bouncing back and forth in those different tackle spots as well. There were question marks and consistency issues pretty much throughout the entire year last year along the offensive line. Coming into fall camp, though, this year, it seems much more dialed in. We've seen the same consistent five guys going with the ones pretty much all of fall camp. That's Ryan Hughes at left tackle. That's Cade Bennett at left guard, Colton Deary at center, Carson Bruno at right guard, and Ben Taylor Whitfield at right tackle. And when you have guys who have been able to get reps next to each other like that, you're just naturally going to be more comfortable. You're going to understand and trust each other a little bit better. And you're going to understand when your center makes a call out or a check at the line, you're going to trust him a little bit more. You're going to go and be able to do your job. So I think TCU's offensive line is in much better shape at this point in the season than it was this time last year. And I think that's going to lead to better pass protection, which was pretty good last year, but more importantly, better run blocking and opening up some lanes for these running backs. And maybe TCU's running game can be a little bit better because of it. On the other side of the ball, I also like where TCU's defensive line is more than I did at this time last year. Now it's a little banged up right now. Marcus Steele and Devin Deal have both been banged up. They haven't been participating in a ton of team. You've got Kelton Mickle, who got hurt during a scrimmage. We haven't seen him come back quite yet. You've got Michael Ibukun Okeyode, who suffered a terrible injury and has been in a neck brace, and we're not sure if he's coming back or when. And so you've got some guys that are a little bit banged up on the defensive line, but overall, I think the depth is much better. You've got Travis Jackson, who can play that edge position, and he's also taken a ton of reps at stud with Devin Deal being on the shelf and Mike being on the shelf. So he's got some position versatility there. You've seen Jonathan Bax get a lot of reps at that stud spot with Devin out as well. He's a guy who's really coming into his own and should be a really good contributor along the defensive line this year. You've got Zach Chapman, who was a freshman All-American last year and has a ton of potential. Paul Oyewale, who didn't play at all last year, is back and has looked fantastic this spring. And you bring in the Washington State transfer Ansel Dinambu to play on the interior of that defensive line alongside Marcus Steele. And all of a sudden, that's 7 or 8 guys that are going to be contributors and rotating in along that defensive line. I like the depth there. I like the top end talent there. And I think that they're going to be much better, especially against the run. You talk about TCU's 2 biggest weaknesses last year. It was running the ball and stopping the run. And I think they made really good strides in both of those areas this offseason to address those weaknesses. Brick's next question, Lemmerman gaining confidence. Kind of talked about that. I do think he's gaining confidence. He's had a couple really good weeks to cap off fall camp. Now just go knock through a couple easy ones, maybe knock a couple extra points through and just see it go through in a live game. And maybe that's all he's going to need to really kind of take off and get to the next level. How's Schobel looked, and will he potentially get any packages this year? I'm going to assume that Brick is talking about Adam Schobel, the quarterback, not John Schobel, the defensive end, who has looked good, has been a little banged up on the shelf lately. And Chad Woodfork is another guy I should probably mention on the defensive line. Not chiseled Greek god, 18 years old, looks 30. Going to be a great player for TCU. Going to see some time in 26 or in 25, and then sky's the limit at 26 and beyond. But Adam Schobel, he's the 3rd string guy right now, right? You've got Josh entrenched as the 1. Ken Seals had a really good fall camp, and I have a ton of confidence in him as the backup on this team. I think he's going to be a guy that's able to push Josh, help Josh on the sidelines, and then also pass on wisdom to Adam Schobel, and just be one of those kind of primary leaders in the QB room. Uh, Really impressed with Ken at that number 2 kind of backup quarterback spot. So I don't know if there's necessarily going to be a package for Adam Schobel. You might be thinking back to Haas Haney last year and how there were some rushing packages for him. Schobel's mobile, but he's also 6'5" and kind of gangly, so it's not like you're gonna put him in there specifically to run the football. And so I don't know that they're necessarily going to have any packages like that. Will we see him? Maybe. I mean, if you get out to a 52 to nothing lead over Abilene Christian in week 3, right? And Ken has already gotten his reps, and Josh is sitting on the bench since halftime. Yeah, get Schobel out there to get some reps and get some live fire and just feel what it feels like to be in a college game. But other than that, barring injuries, I don't anticipate Adam Schobel getting a ton of run as a true freshman. Now, Ken Seals graduates next year, right? If so at the very least, Schobel's probably your backup going into next season. Depending on how they address quarterback in the offseason, depending on what Josh Hoover wants to do after this season, right? So uh, there's maybe a little bit of opportunity to get him into a game time situation this year, but really, Adam Schobel is your future guy. And so you're going to do what you need to do to allow him to grow and to develop and to learn from the guys that are above him on the depth chart. And you're not really going to rush any of that just to get him in a game as a true freshman. Um, so there's that. I know folks are really excited about Adam Schobel. He's a legacy. The Schobels are, one of the, kind of royalty families at TCU. He and his cousin both being freshmen in this class, really cool. But let's let them grow. It's okay to let them grow. All right, I'm gonna take a quick break, take a quick breath, and then we're gonna talk about the SEC schedule change. All right, so last week we got word late in the week that the SEC was moving to a 9-game conference schedule. It's something that they've kind of gotten dogged for over the last few years. The Big Ten, the ACC, and the Big 12 all have 9-game league schedules. The SEC was the only one that was at 8. It gave them that 4th non-conference game, and that 4th non-conference game typically came sometime in November, and it was against a G5 or FCS opponent. It was an opportunity for them to kind of heal up, rest up a little bit, and beat up on a hapless opponent with some of your backups, and kind of take a deep breath, almost like a semi-open week, if you will, in late November before the final home stretch. And so they're moving away from that. They're going to 9 games in the SEC, and they've also committed with their 3 non-conference games to keep one of those a Power 4 opponent. What that looks like as far as Power 4 opponent, I'm not sure, but I'm assuming a lot of these SEC ADs are going to pull out the ACC schedule or ACC standings from 2024, pull out the Big 12 schedule and standings from 2024, look at kind of the bottom third of those standings, and then start making phone calls. Hey, UCF, you guys want to schedule a game? Hey, Houston. Hey, Boston College, you guys want to schedule a game? But hey, they're committed to playing a Power 4 game in non-conference every single season. That's going to give them 10 Power 4 games every single year. I think that's really good for college football. I think it's really good for the Big 12 and the ACC, because that means just by default, you're going to see more SEC teams scheduling more Big 12 and ACC teams. And when those Big 12 and ACC teams have the opportunity, you got to jump at it. You've got to jump at the opportunity. You got to take advantage of that opportunity, and you got to start winning some of those football games. That's how the narrative will shift away from the SEC and to the Big 12 and ACC, giving them some of the power back, is if you go into those Power 4 games and you win them, right? Baylor has a wonderful opportunity on Friday against Auburn. We're going to talk about that game in just a minute. Baylor needs to win that football game, right? If Baylor wins that football game over Auburn, yes, it's Auburn. They're not really expected to be that competitive in the SEC. Baylor's projected to be one of the better teams in the Big 12 this year. But that's how you start to take the power back. That's how you start to change your reputation as a program, your reputation as a league, and take some of that kind of oxygen back from the SEC is to win those football games. So big opportunity for Baylor to do that. Big opportunity for Cincinnati to do that against a Big Ten team. Kind of getting ahead of myself here. But one of the things that the SEC is doing with their 9-game schedule that I think the Big 12 should also do is they are going to 3 permanent opponents and then 6 rotating opponents every single year. This means that you'll play everybody in the conference every 2 years of window. Every 2-year window, you'll have played everybody in the league. And every 4-year window, you'll have had every single team in the league come to your home stadium. And right now in the Big 12, there's a little bit of chaos. There's only 4 protected rivalries in the entire league, which makes no sense to me because they're some of the greatest football games on the planet played in this league. And so you're not getting the same kind of consistent scheduling in the Big 12 that this new SEC model is probably going to provide its member institutions. So for the Big 12, I think that it's a good thing that the SEC is going to 9 games and continuing to play a P4 non-conference game. And I think the Big 12 also needs to get on board with this pod style conference scheduling. You think about it this year, TCU and Texas Tech don't play. That makes no sense. In fact, I'm going to pull up Texas Tech's schedule really quick. Texas Tech used to have 6-7 games that they would play against Texas opponents every single year. And that was great for the league. That was great for the state of Texas. And it was great for Texas Tech because you had all of these opportunities to play in-state rivals. You could go on the recruiting trail and say, look, we beat Baylor this year. We beat Houston this year. We beat Texas this year. Come to Texas Tech. You can do whatever you want. Come to TCU. You can do whatever you want. You can play teams in your state. You can beat those guys that you played with or against in high school. Your family can travel to a ton of your games because they're all close by. But no, that's not the case for Texas Tech this year. Here's how many teams from the state of Texas Tech plays this year. 1, at Houston. Texas Tech does not host another team from the state of Texas in Lubbock this year. And that makes no sense. That makes no sense to me. That would be like, hey, Auburn, we know you love playing Georgia, but you're not going to play Georgia anymore. Or, God forbid, you're not going to play Alabama this year. Or Mississippi State and Ole Miss. Sorry, you guys get a year off from the Egg Bowl this year. It does not make sense. And the Big 12 seems willing to just let some of these rivalries fall by the wayside in a year where teams don't play. So we don't get the battle for the saddle this year because TCU and Texas Tech aren't playing. Texas Tech and Baylor aren't playing. Texas Tech isn't playing Texas or Texas A&M. They're only playing Houston. And when you are a league that is dependent on Texas talent, why are you taking games out of the state? Why are you taking in-state rivalries off the schedule, off the books? It makes no sense. It makes no sense at all for TCU and Texas Tech not to play in a season, or for Tech and Baylor to not play in a season, or for TCU and Houston not to play in a season. You need those in-state rivalries to keep the Big 12 strong because you've got to be able to recruit in this state. And if all your games are played out of state, you're weakening the league. It's just a fact. And then beyond that, you've also got great rivalries other places in the conference that we're not going to see in the coming years, right? Farmageddon. International Farmageddon happened for the first time this year. It's been played 109 years in a row between Iowa State and Kansas State, and it's not going to be on the schedule next year. In what world does that make sense? In what world does that make sense for Iowa State and Kansas State not to play? It's a rivalry that they love, even if some of the school admins don't like the name Farmageddon. It's a 100+ year rivalry that's not going to be played. The league is worse when their teams aren't playing in the rivalry games that make college football great. It's just a fact. And so I think the Big 12 needs to go to this pod format to be able to preserve more of those games. If you had, for instance, a TCU, Baylor, Texas Tech, and Oklahoma State pod, and those 4 teams played each other every year, those are great football games, great rivalries. You've got Texas Tech and Oklahoma State, which is a fantastic rivalry. You've got Baylor TCU, which is a great rivalry. Texas Tech plays at least 2 schools from the state of Texas every single year. It makes a ton of sense. But Big 12 hasn't done it yet. Not sure if they ever will. Brett Yormark seemed kind of standoffish when he was asked about Farmageddon during the trip to Dublin. Um, seemed to suggest that if Iowa State and Kansas State really wanted to preserve the rivalry, they could just play it as a non-conference game. Well, Brett, if you keep canceling games in season like that, or in your league schedule like that, eventually those teams are going to be a non-conference opponent because they're going to have broken off and gone somewhere else because you've taken away all of the tradition that makes college football great. We're losing too many rivalries as it is, right? We just got a couple back with Texas joining the SEC again, but we're losing too many rivalries. Why are we willingly not scheduling some of the greatest rivalries in college football? It just does not make sense to me. But it's good that the SEC is going to 9 games. It's good that they're committed to playing P4 schools in the non-conference still, and I think that's going to benefit the Big 12 and the ACC a ton. They just got to go and they got to win those opportunities. Next up, speaking of opportunities, let's talk about Big 10 and its playoff proposal that came out last week. A little bit of a leakage from the Big 10, but let's talk about that playoff proposal next. All right, Big 10 has made a playoff proposal, not by formal means or by, hey, getting all the conference mates together and saying, let's do this, let's write something up and send it to the rest of the leagues. But they were instead, they've got a leak. They got a leak in the boat. Someone came out last week and told a couple national writers that it had been floated among Big 10 league members that a 28 team playoff might be something that could be in the future. This was an opportunity there might be an opportunity to expand the playoff again to 28 teams in the future. Now, it sounds like, based on some national reporting, that this was part of a brainstorming session among Big 10 leadership, Big 10 ADs, and presidents and chancellors, where they were just kind of all talking and throwing stuff against the wall, kind of a blue sky, big brainstorm opportunity where they were just making a bunch of stuff up, just coming up with a bunch of ideas. But it's interesting to me that this 28 game one leaked, and I feel like someone leaked it for a reason. Maybe someone leaked it so that it would get a ton of criticism so that the Big 10 wouldn't take it more seriously. But the reality is that there was a proposal within the Big 10 as part of this conversation to expand the playoff to 28 games. And what this would look like is 7 auto bids would go each to the Big 10 and the SEC. 7. That's 50% of the SEC would get into the playoff every year. And then 5 auto bids would go to the ACC and the Big 12. That's 24 spots in the 2018 playoff. And then you'd have, I'm assuming a G5 slot still, and then 3 at-larges. Who's getting in those at-large bids? Is it a second G5 team? Is it the 9th team in the SEC? Just 28 is too many. And so this proposal has helped me kind of solidify what I like in the college football playoff. But here are some teams that would have gotten in the college football playoff in 2024 if the Big Ten's proposal had been in place last year. First of all, the 7th team in the Big Ten standings last year with a record of 8-5 was Michigan. Now it's 6th in the conference with a record of 8-5 was Iowa. Do we really think either of those teams deserved to be in the playoff last year? I don't. 10-3 Mizzou was the 7th team in the SEC last year. Probably don't deserve to get in the playoff. Duke was the 5th team in the ACC standings last year at 9-4. And hey, Frog fans, TCU would have been in the playoff last year. 9-4. They finished 5th in the league. Look, it's cool to get a bunch of teams in to a playoff. We see it every year with the NCAA tournament. It's incredibly fun for those 3 weeks. Everybody loves it. It's just a TV ratings just mammoth, right? It's a Goliath when it comes to TV ratings. It makes the NCAA a boatload of money. But the reality is that there's more flexibility with the basketball tournament that gets large than there is with a football tournament. Because you think about how that tournament is only 3 weeks long, It's because basketball players can play in 2 games in 3 days. Football players can't. And so if you're talking about a 28 team playoff, you're talking about a playoff that lasts at least 6 weeks. That is too long. That's too long. That's too many teams. You're just filling in the playoff with teams that haven't earned it. You're filling in the playoff with teams that have no viable chance of actually making a run, winning 5 games in a row, and making it to the national championship. Instead, you're diluting the product. You're risking some of your actually really good teams suffering a loss and then not getting some of the premier matchups that you would otherwise get, right? And I think that that's a detriment to the sport when we've seen the sport invest so much in the playoff. You need to protect it to a certain degree. Now, 4 team always felt wrong because you had more than that, more power conferences than you had spots in the playoff. But now that we've seen the 12 team playoff in action and they're reseeding it this year, that makes a ton of sense. All the conversations about the 16 team playoff, the 5+11, whatever, however you want to structure it, I think 16 is maybe as big as you go. 16 is as big as you go because that gives you 4 clean weeks of football. 1 month, 4 clean weeks of football. You do it all in January, right? Then you get to February, you hand things off to the NFL for the Super Bowl. And it just feels like that makes sense because then you get into February, you have the full month of February after National Signing Day, which should just move anyways. You have full month of National Signing Day off, right? Or after National Signing Day off, all of February. And then middle of March, you come back, you get into spring ball, you get the things rolling again. I just don't see a way where anything more than 16 makes sense. I just don't. And maybe it's just a challenge because of all the auto bids. People are just trying to grab up spots, right? The reality is if you got 28 teams getting into a playoff, you're going to have teams that don't deserve to be there. Every single one of those teams that I listed, Iowa, Michigan, Missouri, Duke, and TCU, Colorado would have been in as well last year. All of those teams lost 3 conference games. Every single one of those teams lost at least 3 conference games last year. Win your football games and you can get into the playoff. It's really just that simple. But the Big Ten, I don't know if they're worried about continuing to grab power away from the SEC since they've won the last 2 national championships or what, but it just doesn't make sense. 28-team playoff just does not make any sense at all. All right, let's reset, and then we're going to talk about this great article from Max Olson over at ESPN. Okay, let's get into what I thought was a really well researched and sourced article last week. When did it come out? Actually, August 24th. So was that 4 days ago by the time you're listening to this? Max Olson dropped a huge article over at ESPN called College Football 2025. How much does each position cost? It was a great breakdown of exactly what he's researched as far as position groups go, how much they make. He gives you a range. He writes about some of the players in that range. I will link to that in the show notes for this episode, so you'll be able to find it in the description on YouTube or in the description on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts as well, so you can go and read it. It's totally free. Really great article. But I found the ranges interesting for a couple of different reasons. First, let's just kind of run down here. Quarterbacks, good quarterbacks cost you $1 million to $2 million. So let's think about this too in the larger context of how much teams can spend, right? So every team can spend up to $20.5 million on revenue sharing. That's not just for football though, right? You've got other sports that you got to pay for. On the high end, we're seeing schools commit 15, maybe a little bit more than $15 million to their football program. And then on the lower end, we're seeing it down around where North Carolina's got it set at about $13 million for Power 4 schools, right? Maybe dipping down into the 12s there a little bit. So if you're thinking about what these ranges are, now think about how many players are in those rooms and what budget you're working with. So good quarterback is going to cost you $1 to $2 million. We know at TCU that Josh Hoover got $1 million more of an offer from Tennessee than what he was making at TCU. That would have put him, my understanding, above this range of $1 to $2 million. Good quarterbacks cost the most. That makes a ton of sense because you live and die by your quarterback so much in college football. Running backs, what Max Olson said was there's a range of $300,000 to $700,000. He had one source say, I think anything below $750,000 for a starting running back at a serious program would be that's an agent saying that anything below $750,000 for a starting running back is disrespectful. Well, not every starting running back is Quinshon Judkins, right? That's just the fact. And when you've got, we're seeing this at the NFL level too, right? Where the value of running backs is seriously being questioned right now. We're, I think, going to start seeing more and more public conversation about running backs in college as well and their overall value. I think that there is value there, but clearly teams are paying $300,000 to $700,000 for their starting running back. That's probably a position that you can find some really good value in. If you feel like you have an edge in evaluating high 3-star running backs, maybe you can save a little bit more money there by getting one of those guys instead of a 4-star, 5-star running back and still having, efficiency and value at that position. Moving on to the outside on the wide receiver, at wide receiver, you got $400,000 to $800,000 more value than running backs, not leaps and bounds more, but I think when you think about general wide receivers, these values make a ton of sense. Now you're going to have your Jeremiah Smiths where they're getting paid pretty much name your price, right? But for the average starting wide receiver, 400 to 800K makes a lot of sense. Now, tight ends, 200 to 400K also makes a ton of sense. Not a lot of offenses use the tight end in a way that would raise their monetary value above that range, right? You don't have a ton of tight ends in the league unless it's Brock Bowers or Tyler Warren going out there and catching 50, 60 passes a year, scoring 10 touchdowns, that kind of stuff. Offensive tackle, by the range that Olson provided was $500,000 to $1 million, $500,000 to $1 million. Now we know based on the Felix Orji, is that how you say his name? The high school tackle that just committed to Texas Tech a couple months ago. It was reported that his contract was valued at $5.1 million. And then Tech came back, or some sources at Tech got word out. It's not actually $5.1 million. It's closer to $2 million. The average annual value was around $775,000 for a 5-star freshman left tackle, right? 5-star freshman tackle, $775,000. That falls right into this range of $500K to $1 million. Now, if you're a junior and you're hitting the portal, you're probably getting that 1 million, maybe even a little bit more, 1.1 if you're one of the most valuable guys on the market. But overall, that offensive tackle spot, it makes sense that right now its range is second highest. The median in that range is second highest behind the quarterback position, because what's more as important as having a quarterback? Protecting your quarterback. So tackles are going to get a good paycheck as well. The interior offensive line's a little lower. Olson said the ranges for those are $300,000 to $700,000. It's in line with players that I know, what they've said they've gotten. We've seen some TCU players transfer out at the interior offensive line position. They got somewhere around in that range as well. So it seems to be pretty accurate there from Max. Going to the other side of the ball, the defensive end, that edge position, that edge rusher. All right, so you think about on offense, what's the most valuable thing? Getting a good quarterback and keeping him upright. So defensively then, logically, most important thing, getting guys who can hit a quarterback. That edge position, $500,000 to $1 million for a premium starting edge in college football. Defensive tackle, again, you move inside. The closer you get to the center, the less expensive the trenches become. Defensive tackles are in that $300,000 to $800K range. And then the linebackers, corners, and safeties, I think right now, this is where teams are trying to save a little bit of money. Linebackers, the range is $200,000 to $500,000. Cornerbacks, the range is $300,000 to $800,000. And safeties, the range is $300,000 to $700,000. So you're seeing a lot of money put up front in the trenches, on both sides of the ball and at the quarterback spot. And then from there, you've got your skill positions that are getting paid, and then your defensive secondary and your linebackers are getting paid a little less than that. It'll be interesting to see how this, like if Max comes back in a year or two and does this exercise again, how the values and the ranges change, aside from just everything bumping up as the rev sharing number bumps up. I'll be interested to see if there are any teams that are trying to kind of beat the system, beat the game in some form or fashion. But right now, if you're asking me, I'm looking out there at teams like TCU where those coaching staffs feel like they have a recruiting edge when it comes to high 3-star wide receivers. Look at Ed Small, right? Look at Jacoby Hayes, and saying to themselves, if we can get a dude, right? Like if we can get a Terry Shelton or an Eric McAllister, we can supplement with our recruiting edge with some of these higher 3-star guys, and then we can save a couple bucks and put that into maybe our offensive line, or put that into our into going and getting a premium edge rusher, right? Or hey, this extra 150 200k will help us keep our quarterback. So I think we're going to see some teams really try to play in the margins there and figure out what works best for them. And I think it's going to be pretty varied. If you're in the SEC and you've got the brand recognition and the conference recognition, maybe you can get a guy for 600k where it's going to cost them 750k at a Big 12 school, right? Stuff like that. It'll be just really interesting to see how all of that progresses as we continue moving deeper and deeper into the rev share era. Okay, lastly, let's take another quick break and then jump into some week 1 picks. All right, we've got real meaningful college football coming up in week 1. We got a taste of it in week 0, but we've got a full slate starting Thursday night with 17 games. I don't know if you're like me, you probably sat down with your significant other recently and just reminded them, hey, the weather's getting cooler. We're all very excited about that. I'm going to grill more, but also football's back. And week 1 now, football is fully back. I've got 9 games I want to talk about really quick, not very in depth. You'll see my picks on the screen if you're watching on YouTube. And that'll kind of wrap up our show this evening. So pick number 1, Thursday night, a neutral site game at Arrowhead Stadium in Kansas City, Missouri. Nebraska against Cincinnati. The newly engaged Travis Kelce will be there. Obviously, that is the biggest storyline. No, but I'm very interested in this football game. I've got buddies at Nebraska. I've got buddies from Nebraska. They are very high on the Cornhuskers this year, and I think they should be, right? We're in year 3 of Matt Rule, and if you look at what he did at Temple and he did at Baylor, year 3 was when it really kind of popped under Matt Rule's leadership. And so we're in year 3 of Nebraska. They've got what I think is a pretty safe, pretty easy schedule. And they started this year on a neutral site game against a Big 12 team that Brendan Sorsby's a fine quarterback. Obviously, you've got Dante Corleone coming back from injury on the interior of that defensive line. But I'll be curious to see what happens in this game. I've got Nebraska covering the 6.5. Maybe not by much. It might just be a touchdown. Might be 10 points. I don't see it really getting too crazy and out of hand. But I do have Nebraska covering that 6.5. That game's on ESPN Thursday night at 8 p.m. Central Time. Pick number 2. This one's on Friday night. There are 2 really fun Big 12 games on Friday night. The first one that we're talking about is Colorado hosting Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech brings back Haynes King. They've got another year under Brent Key. Really fun Georgia Tech team, salty on defense, excellent offensive line play. Colorado trying to replace a ton of bodies, not just Shedeur Sanders and Travis Hunter, but you've got a handful of other wide receivers that you've lost. Key players in the secondary. You lost a couple linemen on both sides of the ball, both to graduation and to transfer. And so we're having to see, obviously Dion can recruit, he can get guys in the portal, but week 1, trying to get a bunch of new faces broken in. Can you come out on top? I'm not so sure. I've got Georgia Tech covering 4.5 in this one. That game's on ESPN at 7 p.m. Central on Friday night. Next up is another game on Friday night. Baylor hosting Auburn on Fox at 7 p.m. So this game's going to run at the same time as Georgia Tech, Colorado. This one's in Waco, and this is where I'm taking the dog. Baylor is a 2.5 point home dog to an Auburn team that I'm just not sure they've got it figured out at quarterback quite yet. Jackson Arnold has been up and down according to reports out of Auburn's fall camp. We all saw the viral clip of Hugh Freeze throwing his visor when Jackson didn't get the ball out on time in 7-on-7. And he said recently he's going to play all three quarterbacks. Whether or not that's actually true, I'm not sure. But when it comes to early season games, especially games like this one, I like the team that's got the quarterback that has more experience under his belt. And for me, that's Baylor. That's Sawyer Robertson. They've got a great running game. Defensively, Dave Aranda's taking over play calling down in Waco again this year. They bolstered that side of the coaching staff as well. They poached Paul Gonzalez from TCU. He's there as the secondary coach now. I like this Baylor team a lot, and I'm going to take them plus 2.5 against Auburn on Friday night. Next up, Saturday morning, Ohio State against Texas in the shoe. Now, I just said how I like veteran quarterbacks early in the season, and that's where I tend to lean. But in this one, you've got Arch Manning, who only played a handful of games last year, obviously an elite prospect. And then you've got Julian Sayin making his first career start against the number one ranked team in the country. I've got Texas plus 1.5. I found it plus 1.5. I'm not sure why I found it or how I found it plus 1.5, but it was there. So I jumped on it on Fox at 11 a.m. I think Arch Manning's experience, even though it's a small sample size, I think that's going to lend itself to Texas getting out of there with a win on Saturday morning. Moving right along. Florida State hosts Alabama. Alabama is a 13.5 point dog. I think year 2 under Kalen DeBoer is going to go better than year 1 did. I don't know how Florida State recovers from being 2-10 last year, but I don't see them hanging with this Alabama squad. Give me Alabama 13.5. That one's on ABC at 2:30 Central Time. Another one Saturday, Clemson LSU. This might be the best quarterback matchup of week 1 with Cade Klubnik and Garrett Nussmeier. Concerns on the LSU offensive line. They lost a couple guys on the defensive side of the ball in the transfer portal. Clemson returns a ton of talent. This one being in Clemson, I think is what does it for me. I've got Clemson covering that -4, maybe by a couple field goals, maybe by a touchdown. But I got Clemson covering the -4 against LSU. But I think this one's going to be an absolute banger of a football game. I'm very excited to see these two teams take the field. That's Saturday night on ABC at 6:30 Central Time. 3 more to go. Saturday night, late night, we get some Big 12/Big 10 After Dark, former Pac-12 After Dark on Saturday night, week 1, with UCLA hosting Utah. Utah's a 6-point favorite. I've got them covering that. I think they cover that pretty easily in this one. That's on Fox at 10 o'clock Central Time. I like Utah. I think they're going to have a top 20 defense in the country again this year. I think bringing in Devin Dampier from New Mexico was great, and bringing his offensive coordinator along with him was equally smart. They're going to rebuild on that offensive line, and if Dampier can just be an average passer, I think Utah's going to be really, really good this year. Meanwhile, with UCLA, we haven't heard anything out of camp because their coach isn't letting them talk at all. We have no idea what's going on over there. It did not go well for UCLA last year. They did not have a great offseason of recruiting, although they did get Nico Iamaleava in the transfer portal from Tennessee. But we saw Nico against tough defenses last year when he was with the Vols, kind of crumbled. Wasn't great in the passing game. Had to create with his legs because it was all he had at times. And I just think if you've got a one-dimensional quarterback like that, Utah's defense can really kind of make them pay. So give me the Utes -6 in that one. Then we move on to Sunday. There are 2 games happening on Sunday. Virginia Tech and South Carolina get us started. The second game is kind of the one that I'm really looking forward to, though. Miami hosting Notre Dame on ABC at 6:30 Central Time. Very excited for this. Go back to what I was saying about quarterbacks earlier. You've got Carson Beck, veteran guy, really talented. When he's healthy, he should be healthy. It's week 1 against a true freshman in CJ Carr, starting on the road in a big game, primetime game at night. It's the only game happening at that time. How is he going to respond to that situation versus how is Carson Beck going to lead Miami in that situation? I like both of these teams a lot, but I like Miami in this game plus 2.5. Somehow they're we've got two home dogs that we're picking right now, Baylor and Miami, and I think both of them cover the 2.5, and I think both of them win outright, frankly. And then last but not least, I can't get out of here without picking the TCU game. So Monday night on ESPN, 7 p.m. Central, the Frogs head to Chapel Hill. They'll take on Chapel Bill and his Tar Heels, Bill Belichick, in his first game coaching at the collegiate level. And let's go back to it again. Gio Lopez, fantastic season last year at South Alabama. Really had the dual threat going, rushed really, really well. Great lefty passer. Um, but there's a lot going on with that offensive line right now. They're on their third string center. They're probably going to end up starting a true freshman at one of their tackle spots. I think TCU's depth on the defensive line gives them the edge here. They're a 3-point road favorite, and I'm going to take the Frogs to cover that 3 points against North Carolina Monday night to close out week 1. Those are my picks. Okay, that's going to do it for the first iteration of Indy Drill. I hope you like it. Let me know in the comments what you want to talk about next week. I was thinking we're going to talk about the SCORE Act, what's going on in Congress right now with college athletics. And then there will be some other news headlines. And, Maryland AD came out with some expansion conversation recently. We can get into that, what next round of realignment looks like. But this is going to be, again, more of a wide angle lens. We're going to take a look at the Big 12, college football storylines, make some picks, and then go from there. So thanks for listening to the first episode of Indy Drill. It's always going to be right here in the Frogs Insider feed. And next up, hope you're ready. Melissa's talking to a great North Carolina guest to break down week 1 of TCU's schedule in 2025. But until then, go Frogs.